Hello, World Stuttering Network. So, so today I have with me Philip Schnipper.
Schnipper, right.
Philip, thank you for joining me today. And we had a fascinating discussion about your research and your work in neuroplasticity. And so that's the purpose of this conversation. But before we dive into that, why don't you tell the World Stuttering Network and the global stuttering community a little bit about yourself, your educational background, um, and all that good stuff.
Okay. So, originally, I've been stuttering since I've been like 3 or 4 years of age. At least that's what I've been told. I don't really remember back then, but, I remember stuttering as a young person. So the thing is that what I always wanted to do is that I figured that I wanted to become a speech pathologist, figuring I can help other people overcome this this thing called stuttering, or some people call it stammering. But in my training, I was told stammering and stuttering is not the same. But that's beside the point. So the point is that at when I was going to school, in the elementary school and middle school, high school, there was no such thing as learning disability. I found out later that I had a significant learning disability. So back then, as a learning disability, people would tell you that you're slow or you're not too bright or we need to focus and pay attention and all of these things. So school kind of just taught me really that I was kind of dumb. I wasn't that bright. So I had a double whammy, so to speak. Here I was, a stutterer and someone with a significant learning disability telling me that I'm dumb. So you can imagine my self esteem was non existent. It was really kind of tough, you know. But I grew up in a sense where my father used to always say, you do what you got to do. So I kept on going. I didn't, close myself in a closet, and just stayed there all day and what have you. So, anywho, so when I got into the field of speech pathology, you know, I I was going for my master's degree, and even in my undergraduate, I was struggling. When I got to my master's degree, I thought I was going to flunk out, because I was really struggling. And I've always been interested in the brain. I've always been that way. I'm not sure why. If someone would ask me why you were so interested, I don't know. I felt that everything came from the brain. If you had a speech impediment, it was not in your mouth, it was in your brain. If you had, a stroke, which affected your body, was not in your body, it was in your brain. So I was always interested in the brain. So I was thinking about the fact that I used to work so hard in college. I used to work 8 hours a day, studying and studying, and I didn't do that well, and I'm thinking something's not right here. Why am I struggling so much? So, anywho, I said, why am I struggling and my friends are not? They're studying half is what I'm doing, and I'm studying so much more. I couldn't, go out and party with them as much because I had to study. Anyhow, I said, wait a minute. I'm thinking to myself, I'm working with post-stroke patients who are 85 years old, and I'm working with learning disabled kids who are 8 years old, and I'm doing the same exact stuff. And I said, wait a minute. I know what a stroke is. So I'm assuming that learning disability is a neurological issue. And like 10 years later, they figured that out, that it is a learning disability. I mean, it's a neurological issue. So then I got into this whole thing with, I don't know if you ever heard of metacognition. I'm not sure. But, I got into metacognition way before anyone else did. When I introduced it to my school, they all thought I had three heads. I said, all right. But later on, obviously, it became a very important facet in learning. But then I got into neuroplasticity. I said, you know what? A stroke patient, there's a thing called spontaneous recovery, which lasts about 6 months after the stroke. So anything will come back, is going to come back within that period of time, because the brain is plastic. It's constantly, changing and growing. And so I said, maybe I can come up with an idea. Maybe I can do something with my own brain. So I did a lot of research you know, on the brain and neuroplasticity. And so what I did is that I was able to come up with a learning program that I know people say, I don't know how that can be, but I can talk directly with the brain. So I don't use words like other people do. Like if you wanted to help your kids to read, you say, go and read, or go and study, or go and pay attention, go focus, what have you. I was told that all my life. And guess what? It didn't help, you know, because I tell people is that imagine you tell your child to go up to their room. All right. Now say, I want you to be in a quiet place and go read. Now they're going to go up to their room and they're going to have a conversation with their brain. You're not going to hear it. It's internal. They're going to say something like, okay, brain, my mother said we're going to study now. And the brain's going to say, fabulous, I'm ready to go. Tell me what to do. Well, he says, we're going to study. Brain's going to say, great, I'm ready. Tell me what to do. And that was the problem. The problem is the brain did not know what to do. It was never instructed. Like, what is learning? People say to me, if I asked you what is learning, what do people say? They say, well, it's acquiring information, acquiring knowledge, becoming quote unquote smarter. And I said, yes, absolutely. That's what a person does. That's not what a brain does. What a brain does, it actually, for every piece of information that you teach it, it grows another neuron, another connection. So each neuron could have up to 10, 15,000 connections, which means that, you start out with 100 million neurons within your brain when you're born, so to speak, you know. But by the time you get to your age and our age and this, you have trillions of connections. And I always tell people is this, I don't know if you ever heard this in teachers or in school, they would say, oh, the teacher would say, you know what? The kids went away for the weekend. They came back and they forgot everything.
Yeah,
You know,
of course, of course.
right,
Um, so sorry to jump in, but so that the audience can follow you exactly, maybe you could explain to us what you mean by metacognition and how that um, how, how you can override subconscious thought through the metacognition that you speak about.
right. So, for example, if I asked a reading teacher who teaches someone how to read, and I asked them the question is, what do you want the brain to do? And they'll look at me and say, I don't know. I just wanted to read. Okay. But what does reading mean? What do we mean by reading? So I came up with this plan. It was called CAP, KAP. Now, what you don't realize, you cap, I cap, everyone in your household caps, everyone in the world caps. It's keyword, analyze, and paraphrase. Everyone does that. The brain understands that. The brain doesn't understand read unless you don't have any kind of a learning disability. If you don't have a learning disability, the brain kind of just knows. The brain is built to develop language. And that's what it's known for, you know.
So, do you think that stuttering is a learning disability
Yes,
in need
it's
of
a
retraining?
neurological. You're born with this. For example, in my research, I was found that, which I believe, the left side of your brain is devoted to language, and that's what most people have, So that's why, for example, if you have someone with a stroke and the left side is affected, most likely their speech is affected, their language, their vocabulary is affected. Where the right side is more creative, it is not as based in language. Where the stutterer, their language is based mainly in the right side, not the left side. That's my
So if
research.
I could just circle back there for just a minute, Philip. Now, when you say that stuttering is a learning disability, okay, there are a lot of people are going to find that offensive because many people who stutter are absolutely brilliant.
No, no, no. I'm not
Yeah,
saying learning
so,
this. No, you're taking my words. I never said that stuttering is a learning disability. I
okay,
said stuttering
gotcha,
is
gotcha. Just wanted to make sure we were crystal
no,
clear on that. Okay,
no. I've never said that.
okay.
So in order to become, let's just say we were talking about learning disability. People have this misnomer. In order to have learning disability, you have to have an average to above average intelligence to be labeled as learning disability. You have to be bright. So if you had a class in school that were quote unquote learning disabled, they'd be the smartest class in the school, usually. It's not a question of intelligence, it's a question of processing. It's how your brain is wired, you know. And this is how I define learning disability, if that's what you, just to give you an idea of what I define learning disability.
So
And
basically, metacognition is you control your thoughts.
yeah, metacognition is came up with this. Dr. Flagen came up with this term in 1978.
Okay.
A psychologist, Basically, people would say metacognition is thinking about thinking. That's what most people define it as. What it is, metacognition is the ability to monitor your own thinking. Like, for example, when you're doing something at home or wherever you're doing, you spend a lot of time thinking to yourself. You're problem solving. You're kind of asking yourself questions, trying to answer them, and so on. That is metacognition. So, in order for someone to become an independent thinker, you have to have metacognition. If you don't have it,
So that's not necessarily reframing the past. That is in real time,
yeah, and
if I
that's
understand
right. So that's
how you're explaining
metacognition,
it. Okay.
right?
In
So
real time.
right, right.
Okay.
So anytime you're problem solving, think about what you do. When you're problem solving, sometimes you get quiet, and you're thinking about this and thinking about that. You come up with a solution. That is the metacognitive pr- process, if you want to call it. So, but my thinking is that, so I was able to overcome my learning disability. Now, people will tell you there's no such thing. You can't overcome learning disability. In the same way, they say you can't overcome stuttering. It's not something you just, it's not a cure for stuttering. And I agree, everyone has their own. But what I did is that I thought, well, wait a minute. If I can use my neuroplasticity to overcome my learning disability, can I do it for my stuttering? So I didn't exactly know how to go about this, what do I have to concentrate on? And then I remember I took a course with Martin Schwartz. I don't know if you know the name.
I spent $4,000 for a rubber hose
Oh yeah,
in
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
1992.
I went through the same. I went through the same. Right, right,
Yes. Yes.
right, right. And then there's William Parry. I don't know
Yeah,
if you
sure.
know him.
Sure.
Right. Okay.
Bill
So
Perry. Yeah, I've known him for a long time.
right. So I never went. I went through Martin Schwartz's therapy way back when. Didn't really help. And I looked at William Parry. So but what I did is looked at the research. And what I found was the Valsalva effect or the Valsalva response. And then I had my aha moment at that time. I said, oh, what if I can voluntarily control my Valsalva effect? Would I be able to become fluent? And that was my concentration. So if I can, it's the same thing that I tell people. If you look at someone who stutters and who sings, like Mel Tillis, if you know him, Mel Tillis, the country singer, or,
Yeah, he's a Coca-Cola cowboy.
yeah, he, he was such a stutterer. I mean, he was significant,
Yeah.
but had a beautiful voice and sang and never stuttered, you know. So, and people will say, well, why is that? I said, well, when you think about it, here at me as a speech pathologist, I understand about the vocal folds and how it works and so on, you know. And so what's interesting is that I've spoken to many stutterers like online or what have you. And I say to them, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you a sentence to repeat. And when you repeat it, I don't want you to use any voice. Just mouth the words. And not one person ever stuttered. Not one. Fluently, I said, how many times did you stutter then? They said, none. I said, okay. I said, the idea is that it's only when you, as far as my concern, it's only when I initiated voice is when I stuttered. No voice, no stuttering. I said, well, wait a minute. So I know what the Valsalva effect is. It's special. Everyone has it. I don't care who you are. You have the Valsalva effect. Because to lift anything heavy, you need to cut off your vocal folds to maintain the stiffness in your lungs and in your upper body. Otherwise, your upper body becomes limp and you can't pick up anything heavy. And so when you're stuttering, I found the Valsalva doesn't stay open on a continuous basis. You have to like push the sounds out, push, the words out. So it's the same thing when I work with someone in speech. When I work on articulation, some therapists work with this, the tongue and the lips and what have you. I never worked with that. I only work with this. I only work with the brain. I'm strictly a brain-based person. So whenever you have a conversation with me, it's going to be on a brain-based basis because that's all I know. All I know how to do is to teach a brain how to learn.
Now, do you have a degree in speech pathology? Do you
Yes,
have a master's degree and you have a
yes,
CCC
yes.
and everything you've got? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been doing it for over 50 years.
Amazing. Amazing. Now, um, I I noticed online somewhere that you made the comment that you do not stutter at all anymore. You no longer stutter.
Right. Well, no one would know that I stutter. Let's put it that way. Do I have
Because it,
moments that I have a
yeah,
little bit of something?
yeah.
Yeah. Another stutterer might know that I have something.
That's what I was just going to say because it sounds like our stuttering management style is very similar. We switch words, we use filler words. I mean, we're very similar in our management style. So that's what I was just going to say, and I'm glad that you said that. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
interesting.
the idea is that nothing is perfect.
Sure,
I'm not an orator. There's no doubt about it. I'm not an orator, but
but you have a powerful voice. I imagine that you can give a top-notch presentation. I imagine you have.
yeah. I mean, the idea is that again, I have. It's like the same thing as this. Like I know parents have wanted me to tutor their kids. And the funny thing is I don't tutor anything. I can't tutor you a subject matter. I don't know. But I can improve their ability to learn the subject matter by teaching them how to learn. Because once I teach the brain how to learn, it can learn anything.
So,
Yeah.
got a question for you.
Yeah.
You know, Now you're talking about controlling your thoughts in real time. Now we all know that when we get into a block, when I would go into my major block, it was like an out of body experience, Philip. I don't know where I went, but I certainly wasn't there. So, how do you, when you get into that time stopping block where time stands still and you're in that block for several seconds, a couple minutes, how do you regain control of the present? I mean, some people call that mindfulness, and there's a whole thing, there's a whole field of study on mindfulness. But how do you encourage your clients to get back into real time?
Well, in my brain, I can only talk about my own brain, so to
Right.
speak. My brain doesn't allow me to have block. It just stops me. It immediately stops me. Once I think I'm getting to a block, because years rewiring my brain based upon neuroplasticity. So if I think I'm about to get into a block, my brain literally stops me, and I recoup, and and then I go. I never get into the block. I just don't. I don't. In my old days, I used to really suffer
Oh,
and
yeah.
try to get it out.
Right.
I don't do that anymore
Right.
because my brain is already wired for fluency.
So people will want to know, how did you do it? So if you could just lay it out in just
Okay,
very simplistic steps. I mean, that's what people want to know. How
right.
did you do it?
The hardest part to doing this is to be able to get the feeling of what it is to have your vocal folds open. You have to be able to, like people would say, how do you know pleasure if you don't know pain? Kind of thing.
Right.
So it's the same kind of thing. Is that your vocal folds? You know, Once you get the understanding, like what I mentioned before, it's a matter of getting the voluntary control. Like right now, a stutterer has no voluntary control of their vocal folds. It's controlled by the stutter, not by themselves. So as soon as they start talking, the vocal folds begin to close, and you have to push the vocal folds open. It's like a cough. In order for you to cough, because I've done a lot of dysphagia, which means training people up talking. I mean, of eating and swallowing. I did a lot of worked in many hospitals and nursing homes and blah blah blah. Now, you know, one of the things for a cough, in order to cough, you have to close your vocal folds, build up pressure, and then let it go. Kind of like a block. The block is the same thing. You close your vocal folds, and because of the tension, and now you're trying to push it out, you know? And so, what you have to be able to do is get the sense of training your brain to control the vocal folds, and that comes with practice.
It seems like that would be the same as easy onset, where
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
going into the block and into the word and you're keeping the vocal cords open. Is this just another um, a rebranding of easy onset? And if not, what makes it different?
What makes a difference to me, easy onset is that you're actually going into a block and releasing it, trying to avoid the block by doing a technique or a strategy. I don't have a technique or strategy. What I just do is I control this, because stuttering to me is not here. Stuttering is here. So I'm able to talk. Talking is not a problem for me, but my Valsalva effect was a problem. And my whole goal was training my brain to teach my Valsalva effect not to initiate unless I was lifting something heavy, what have you. Is it easy? Absolutely not. Because when your brain is wired to stutter, it's very hard because the brain wants to close the Valsalva. I mean, that's just what it is. It's trained to do that. Like, just to give you an understanding, when I work on someone's articulation, so like they have a TH for S sound, they'll say thun instead of sun. Now, people will think that I'm fixing this, but I'm not. What it is that you actually have a loop in your brain, I call it. If you had a camera that you can look into the brain, you'll actually see a loop that's a TH for S. So when the kid says thun, the brain says, good work. That was a good sound. It's not appropriate sound. The brain doesn't know any better. So when I teach it the other way, after a while, what you can actually see, that neuron begin to fade and a new one builds up. And then that builds up. And when that becomes implemented strong enough, the other one goes away. Like, I've never in my life ever had a kid, when I trained them to do sun instead of thun, come back to me in 6 months and say, hey, Mr. Schnipper, I lost my S. It's never going to happen because the brain has already been rewired. The same thing when I teach kids how to learn, I actually literally retrain their brain. I've never had a kid come back to me and say, Mr. Schnipper, I forgot everything you taught me. You can't. And it's the same reason why when the teacher says the kid forgot everything over the weekend, no, they didn't. They never forgot it. They never learned it. Because if you ask the teacher, did you forget it? They'll slap you. They'll say, what do you mean, would I forget it? No, of course not. Why? Why didn't you forget it over the weekend? And they forgot it. Because once, like myself, once it's in place, it doesn't go away anymore. It's there forever.
So are you saying that as a toddler or in the ages of 3 to 6, when most stuttering appears, that we trained our brains to stutter?
Yeah, for whatever reason, the same as a learning disability. I didn't choose to become learning disabled. It's not my choice. It's just the way your brain is wired. You some people are wired to be a genius. Some people are wired for other reasons, for other things. They're great at math. They're great at this. It's all about how the brain is wired. And the idea with neuroplasticity, the beauty of the brain, is you can change. You can actually, that's why they call the brain is plastic. But was I born with a learning disability? Absolutely. Was I born with a wiring for stuttering? Absolutely. Now, was it nurture? Was it nature? You'd have to think about, whether was I born as a stutterer or was my brain kind of maybe traumatized or learned a certain way, and my brain formulated a certain way? I don't know. But in my way of thinking, and because I become practically an expert in this stuff, I look at the brain because the brain controls everything. I don't care who you are. I've seen I've seen geniuses. I saw one who was a neuroscientist. I mean, she studied the stars. She was like an astrophysicist, whatever they do. I have no clue. But I saw her in a nursing home, and she was a vegetable. Well,
Wow.
how'd she lose it? I mean, she didn't lose it. It's her brain. She had problems in her brain. The brain doesn't function as well. It's gone. How it does, they're still working on Alzheimer's. They're still working on dementia. They're not exactly sure. No one really knows about the brain. In fact, I don't know if you remember, but Obama uh, put in $100 million and he called it the year of the brain. In fact, they have a workshop. It's a 4-day workshop every year. It's called Learning and the Brain. I went there once. It was fabulous because it was like I was seeing the people that wrote the books that I had read, kind of thing. So
Sure.
it validated everything that I was doing and what have you. But it was developed by MIT and Harvard and all these big names. I mean, they're still trying to figure out how to affect the brain. Even what's his name, Elon Musk. What is he doing? He's making implants to put into the brain so you don't have Parkinson's and blah blah blah.
Well,
So
well, I definitely believe in the positive effect of neuroplasticity on the brain. I mean, it just so happens that about 8% of my clientele down in South Florida, because I always bring up stuttering during the sales presentation,
mhm,
and about 8% of my clientele stutter.
mhm,
And there was only one guy out of all those people that noticeably stuttered. I would have never known uh, that they stutter. Their stuttering has disappeared.
mhm,
And I've seen people where stuttering has disappeared. Sure. I
mhm,
mean, if you, um, people like us, we've met thousands of people who stutter. We can recognize it, even that little slight stutter.
mhm.
We know that it's there, but
Right,
it is unrecognizable to the um, uh, non-stuttering listener.
right.
So, and they all had the same story that, they had a rough time growing up. It was very difficult. And, the stuttering disappeared over the years. So I know that, um, rewiring the brain through, neuroplasticity, it's real. It's a real thing.
Well, this is what I found. I mean, this is like everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own way of becoming whatever. Some people will say, when I read some of the other entries, in the discussions, who talk about, what, there's no way of getting rid of this. So I'm just going to live with it, and I'm just going to be confident, and what have you. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't do what Martin Schwartz would say: go into a store and stutter, or Van Riper. That was his big thing. Van Riper, you become comfortable with stuttering. Just go and stutter, and then after a while, you won't feel fearful of it, and blah blah blah. It wasn't me. I couldn't do it. I already had such a low self-esteem from my learning disability days and other things. I didn't need to do that. I just couldn't. That wasn't my thing. I said, you know what? There was a period of time, I remember a few years back, I said, you know what? I'm never going to get rid of this. I'm going to always stutter for the rest of my life. I said, this is, I get very depressed, what have you. And I said, you know what? Well, let's see. And so that's when I did all this research, because I've been researching the brain for over 25 years. So it's not something that just came up to me. One day I said, oh, I'm going to look at my brain and I'm going to figure out all this about. No, it worked. I did it for like over 25 years. I did the research, did this, plus the fact I'm very unique in the sense that I know both sides. I know the side of learning disability, and I know the internal functioning of learning disability. I know how someone feels with a learning disability because I've lived it all my life. So I know what they're going through. I know how it is, you know. And so my way of thinking, and my way of thinking was, if I can overcome my learning disability, by using the program that I developed, I said, well, could I also use it for my speech? And so far, it's been fine. 99.
What type of learning disability did you have?
Well,
Was it
people will
labeled?
ask that,
Yeah.
and they'll say, I was never tested, but I know I have a language-based learning disability, which means, and this is how I define learning disability. Let's say for me, imagine you have a filing cabinet. Everything is in alphabetical order. All right. You can find anything real fast. Boom, 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 in alphabetical order. What if I take those same files, took them out of the filing drawer and dropped them on the floor and mixed them up? Now, I didn't take anything out. It's all there. But now try to find something.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's
That's a
basically learning
great
disability.
analogy. Great analogy.
And that's basically learning disability.
Do you think that they misdiagnosed your um, learning disability because of stuttering? You think
No, no.
they
Don't forget, learning disability wasn't even known when I was young. There wasn't even a
uh,
word for it.
okay.
Now, do you know how learning disability, the name, came about? So people don't really know. They
No,
don't do
I've
the
not heard
research.
this story.
Well, basically, what it is this. What they did is that they looked into all these different disabilities. They looked into, hearing impairment, low intellectual abilities, Down syndrome, all these others. And they said, well, wait a minute, we still have this other disability that they didn't know how to define. That I said, well, it's not, hearing impairment. It's not intellectual. It's not Down syndrome. It's not this. So it must be a learning disability. And that's how they came up with the term. It's a wastebasket term.
Oh,
It has
okay.
no meaning.
Yeah.
This has no meaning. Learning disability, like when I was in Boston, working in the school system, I retired from the Boston school system, as well as I did the medical and that kind of stuff. But the point is that the only place I ever met a true learning disabled person was at Boston Latin. I didn't find it anywhere else. Now people say, How can that be? You found learning disability in the most elite school in Boston?" I said, "Yeah, because that's where you'd find a learning disability. These are the kids that I wanted to work with. When I used to go to the IEP meetings, I used to say to the parents, I said, you know what? You know what the biggest problem that your child has?" They say, "No, what?" "They're so, so very smart." I said, "What do you mean? Why is this person on an IEP then?" I said, "They were so smart, they could overcome the learning disability up to a certain point. By the time you get into ninth, 10th grade, your strategies do not work anymore, you know? And that's where I used to see these kids. And so the kids that I wasn't able to see them because I had to send my evaluation to my supervisor. And she would see the numbers and say, wait a minute, you can't see this kid. He scores so high. But when I look at the testing, I don't look at it the way she looks at it. I look
You
at
see
two things.
potential.
I see the
Yeah.
percentage
Yeah.
and the pattern. If you
Oh,
look at the pattern,
yeah.
you immediately see it's a learning disability. It's not intelligence. They're very, very bright. You know, they got into Latin, they had to take a test. But then
Yeah.
when they got in, they were they were flunking out. So they were spending more time with the school psychologist than they were with other people because they were feeling so down and out. They said, look, I've been told I was smart all my life, the same as me. You're smart, you're smart, you're smart. Well, I don't feel smart. I go to school and I'm struggling or what have you. No one knew about learning disability when I was. Now everyone talks about it. A lot of people don't understand it, but they talk about it because it's a wastebasket term. It's the same thing when you say stuttering. Well, there's such a variety of stuttering. I
Yeah.
mean, when you talk about stuttering, there's this kind of stuttering and that kind of stuttering and this, I mean, you can't pin it down to say stuttering is this. Did you meet Joe? He's a true stutterer. I mean, how do you say that?
I, I mean, you really can. There's 80 million people on the face of the planet that stutter, and there's 80 million unique ways to stutter. You know
Right.
that.
Right. So, and the
Yeah.
same thing. So what the hardest part for me was I couldn't get any answers. No one could give me an answer. No one could help me with my learning.
Yeah.
You know, no one could help me because my mother tried, so to speak. She sent me to this person and that person. Didn't work until I understood about the brain, and that sort of changed everything. But then I realized I can actually make a difference, a lasting difference in someone's brain. And that's a different myself. So basically, to sum this all up, when I did my research on learning disability for my own learning disability and came up with a very powerful learning tool, I said, well, maybe I can use that for my stuttering. And that's how it all came about. So as you can see, I'm very passionate about
Oh, yeah.
the brain
Yeah.
and how it learns. And to me, it's the most powerful tool that you can use that I know of, you know.
So as we start to wind down this truly wonderful conversation, I have enjoyed spending time with you, Philip. So as we start to wind things down, what practical exercises could you give to our um, listeners on how to develop positive neuroplasticity towards their stuttering?
Well, this is the hardest point of all. It's understanding. That's the one point that I liked about Martin Schwartz is that passive flow. Is that's the only thing I really took from him. The other stuff I could do without, but
Yeah.
just that passive flow.
Self-hypnosis and all that other stuff he had you do.
Right. Yeah. I didn't. I don't look into, but just that one point of understanding how it feels. Like I tell people is this: go listen to someone who is asleep, who does not snore, just sleeping, and listen to their breathing. And I say that's the breathing you need for speech. That's the breathing. Very relaxed. The air is just flowing. Because the only thing that the vocal cords do, the only thing it does, it just makes a noise. That's it.
Yeah. So the whole
That's
Martin
all it does.
Schwartz thing of so the whole airflow technique, he would give you a rubber hose that was
Right,
about this long, and you would
right,
hold it on your
right,
you take one end, you'd hold it on
right,
your lower lip, and you take the other end
right,
and you stick in
right,
your ear.
right.
And you
I
would
did all
listen
that.
for a
Right,
certain sound, certain breath. He called it flutter. It was a very distinct sound. And when you made that sound, your vocal cords were totally open and it was impossible to stutter.
right,
So you would talk like this. And so I'm actually using the flutter technique in that last sentence. But
right,
that was the whole Martin Schwartz thing.
right,
And he
right,
called it the airflow technique. Very popular in the late 80s, early 90s.
right. But the problem that you have is that it's it's very hard to get voluntary control of your vocal folds because when you think about it, most of what you do is reflexive. You don't think about it. You
It's a
don't think about
reaction. Yeah.
talking.
Yeah. Sure.
This is the reason why you're able to walk and talk at the same time.
Yeah.
Because the brain takes over the walking so you can talk. The same thing as eating. When I used to tell people, when I used to work on their swallowing, I said, imagine that you're in the movie theater. You have this big bowl of popcorn. Then you look down and you say, wait a minute, who ate my popcorn? You don't think that. It's all gone.
You
Same
have
thing
some
with,
great analogies, Philip.
yeah. But the problem is that's the same thing as speech. We don't think about it. We
Yeah,
just talk.
right.
But when the
Right.
brain is interfering with your talking, then you have stutter.
I would agree with that for sure, for sure.
And that's basically the problem. Like I now have voluntary control over my Valsalva effect. So when I used to not have that, obviously. And I would get to a block and I would try to push it out, and I get very tired and all tension and all this. I don't have that anymore. The funny thing is this, that your readers will appreciate this. I knew I was on the right track when I could say my name without stuttering. That was the turning point in my whole therapy. Was that because I used to like practice. I go to the doctor's office. I knew I was going to stand in line. You're going to ask me what's your name. I'm thinking like shit. So I used to practice in the car. Philip I was like, this is ridiculous, but I used to practice all the time.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
yeah,
want to answer the
yeah,
phone. I couldn't say hello. I'd say yes. I couldn't say, so
yeah,
all
sure,
these
sure.
things we've all been through. I've been through
Mhm.
all this stuff.
Mhm.
I understand, so the idea of not having to worry about it is such a fabulous feeling because now the same thing as eating, my brain has now taken over. Now it's reflexive for me. It never was, but it's not something I'm going to forget. You know what I mean?
Right, of course,
Like,
of course.
like tomorrow morning, I'm not going to say shit. All of a sudden, I'm stuttering again. No, 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 it's
It's
not.
funny.
It's not going to happen because once the brain is wired, it's
Yeah,
wired.
yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
that. But like you said, as far as being that way, people have to practice. They have to teach the brain what is that you want it to do. The brain doesn't know. The brain doesn't know about the Valsalva effect. Doesn't know about all this stuff. It's a matter of teaching the brain. This is what you want it to do. You want it to be able to breathe passively. And after a while, the brain actually understands. Like, my brain won't let me go into a block. It stops me. I don't have to stop my brain and say, oh, wait a minute, I'm coming to a block. Brain stops me and I go another way or whatever. I never go into that, 3 second or 5 second block. Doesn't happen anymore, because it's automatic now.
yeah. So step number one would be knowledge, understanding about the effect. Step number two would be practice. Then step number three would be real life, using it in real life situations. And then step
Right.
number four would be constantly monitoring. Um, if that's what I understand, um, what you're telling us to do.
Well, it's like I tried doing it online. I've had people call me and say, I need help. I need help.
Yeah,
Trying to do it online is like an impossibility because I
it's
can't
difficult.
tell
Yeah, yeah,
if your passive flow is actually passive
right.
online. I can't tell. It's like one of the things that he taught, like Martin Schwartz would teach, which I agree to. If you take the back of your hand and you blow, you're not supposed to blow, is just let the air out passively. You should only feel heat, but not air. And if you do it often enough, you fall asleep because it's so passive.
Hmm.
You're just letting the air out when you normally breathe. That's
That was
that's what.
definitely one of Martin Schwartz's um, favorite phrases about the passive airflow. I remember that.
Yeah, because
No,
that's because I tell people when you go to sleep, do you normally die? No.
no, yeah,
Why don't you die? You should be dead, when you go to sleep. No, because the body automatically breathes. But when you're breathing, sleeping, your Valsalva is always open. But when you get up and start talking, your brain says, close it, close it, close that Valsalva. But when you're sleeping, it doesn't. Why? You would think it would close it, you would be choking all the time,
yeah,
but you're
yeah,
not,
yeah, that's true.
you know.
Philip, thank you for this fascinating conversation. I think that you definitely have some good things to share with the global stuttering community, and I hope many people watch this and learn more about you and your uh, wonderful information. So I really appreciate you spending some time
Well, thank you so much
with us
for the
today. Thank you.
opportunity. I've always
Yeah,
I've
thank you.
always wanted to meet you, and tell you my story because people are only seeing drips and drab of my story,
Right, right,
and they take me like a an outsider. I'm
right,
not an
right,
outsider.
right.
I'm just like you, except I'm coming it from another point of view.
Sure, sure. And it's so nice to put a face to the name and to meet the person,
Right.
so, and that's
And
what
I appreciate
happened
everything that
today.
you've done. I appreciate everything you've done for the stuttering community. you know, and so, you've done a wonderful job, internationally. I mean, not many people have achieved what you have achieved.
Takes a village and it takes a wonderful team. I've got some amazing people
Oh,
um, that I stand side by side with. So I will pass those compliments on to the rest of the team. So
well,
uh,
one of the things,
thank you.
just as a final note, what's interesting is that very rarely do I speak to someone like yourself who's in the United States. Normally, I'm from Nepal, Pakistan, India, all over the world. They contact me, but they don't have speech pathology there, or they don't have any, services there. So it becomes a big problem, you
Yeah.
know. And I understand, it's and the field is really shrinking. It was, so a lot of even the programs that I went to have already closed. So I don't know if you have a few minutes. I'll tell you the story. The quick story is that when I when I graduated with a master's degree in speech pathology in New York, they had already eliminated half the speech pathology students in the school system. They got rid of them.
Wow. Wow.
So I had to. I went. I tell people I sent out 50 resumes all over the world. I wonder if I got one in from Australia. Do you think I would have gone? I don't know. But I got my first job in Virginia, so at least I stayed within the United States. But during that time, when they didn't have a law, the All Handicapped Children's Act, the 94 142 Act, that changed everything. Before that, there was no law that says you have to help handicapped kids in the school. So when that happened, all these programs that were training speech pathologists were closing. There was no need for speech pathologists. Now all of a sudden there's a big surge, but not enough schools to train the speech pathologists. So that's why there's a big shortage now.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for everything. I really appreciate your time.
Philip, thank you once again.
Thank
And
you.
I will see you around the world stuttering community.
Okay. Thank you. And you stay well.